A research submarine has just made an incredible discovery in the waters near Hawaii. A now fossilized UFO becomes reactivated after the submarine shines its light on the UFO's fossilized surface. The light not only starts to activate the UFO, but also awakens the aliens inside. The research team reports their findings to the US government. Hoping to keep the situation in Hawaii under wraps until the biomass can be fully assessed, the military is sent in to secure the area. As submarines continue their investigation and shine more light onto the giant rock, the UFO receives enough energy to lift off. As the fossilized UFO starts to rise to the surface, submarines nearby are destroyed. However, once the UFO reaches the surface, it becomes dormant once again. Ships move into position and harness the rock, hoping to keep it still. For now, scientists monitor the biomass in secret. Meanwhile, in the years since Godzilla's rampage in Tokyo, G-Force has found new monsters inhabiting the Marshall Islands mutated by the Americans. Anguirus, Kamacuras, and Kamunga are closely monitored by G-Force. Along with the Rodans, these monsters are currently confined to the islands. In the event any of these monsters escape, G-Force has started to expand across the globe. Additionally, G-Force is in the process of rebuilding the Super X and repairing Mechagodzilla. With repairs nearly complete, scientists have started to upgrade Mechagodzilla's software with a new AI system to compete with Project Mogira. In the US, great strides have been made with Mogira's development. Assembly of the mecha is nearly done and the G-Cell infusion has been completed. On the G-Cell front, both the Japanese and Americans have made significant progress in their research. While the US hasn't yet uncovered Godzilla's weaknesses, they have uncovered new ways they can use G-Cells. This has given birth to a new top-secret project dedicated to creating a bioweapon called anti-nuclear energy bacteria. However, in Japan, things have taken an unexpected turn. A few months ago in Kyoto, an experiment went horribly wrong. Now, an 80-meter-tall rose stands in Lake Biwa. Hidden from the public, scientists are currently trying to figure out how to harness its power. Weeks later, sensors at the G-Force base on Mount Mahara start picking up large amounts of seismic activity near the volcano. Suddenly, a massive earthquake strikes the island and triggers a volcanic eruption. With G-Force's crater trap weakened, Godzilla takes advantage of this opportunity and frees himself. Godzilla erupts from underneath the rock, debris flies everywhere. Godzilla roars as he heads out of Mount Mahara. Lava destroys a nearby village as Godzilla leaves Oshima Island. Godzilla heads out into the ocean and the military swings into action. Sensing Biollante in Kyoto, Godzilla begins to change his course. G-Force determines that Godzilla is heading to Biollante and can sense it because they are both made up of G-cells. The Navy attempts to slow Godzilla down, but Godzilla easily destroys the first round. Meanwhile, after being dormant for weeks since its discovery, the fossilized UFO suddenly activates. It scans the area and finds Godzilla. After determining that Godzilla would be a powerful host to control, the UFO frees itself from the military restraints and locates Godzilla. Everyone watches in awe as the giant rock hovers in the air. The UFO finds Godzilla and heads to his location. After some time, the UFO arrives in the area as Godzilla battles with the Navy. The UFO moves in and attempts to gain Godzilla's attention. Godzilla sees the UFO in the distance and challenges it to a fight. Godzilla fires his atomic breath and the UFO retaliates. The two go back and forth. The UFO repeatedly attacks Godzilla. Then it supercharges its beam and knocks Godzilla down. Godzilla regains himself and the monster's beams collide. Godzilla manages to overpower the UFO, causing a huge explosion. The UFO crashes into the water and falls deep beneath the ocean and becomes dormant once again. The explosion pushes Godzilla underwater. Before going dormant, the UFO sends out a distress call to a monster deep in space. While it would take the monster some time to arrive on Earth, the sheer power of King Ghidorah moving through space sends a cluster of asteroids hurling towards Earth. Discombobulated, Godzilla changes his course from Kyoto and heads out into the North Pacific Ocean to rest. By the end of the year, NASA detects that asteroids are on course with Earth. It's estimated they will reach Earth by New Year's Day 1986. The news of asteroids heading for Earth causes the world to descend into panic. The possibility of world destruction results in civil unrest. NASA and the military unveil a joint strategy to save the planet. With Mogira now complete, slight modifications are made as the crew gets ready for launch. The news of this plan starts to restore some order. Mogira closes in on the cluster of asteroids. NASA briefs the crew on the backup plan in the event of failure. Loaded with the nuclear device, Mogira is sent into space and engages the asteroid cluster. Mogira fires at the asteroids, but its weapons are useless. Shocked, the crew decides to use Mogira's drills to try and break up the rock. The cyborg attempts to use its drill system. Mogira manages to break up some of the rock, but the drills start to overheat. The US orders Mogira to deploy the nuclear device, but during the deployment process, the device gets stuck and is unable to launch. The crew decides to fly Mogira into the asteroids to trigger the device. The crew sacrifices themselves and Mogira to detonate the device. After smashing directly into the asteroids, a massive explosion is triggered. The nuclear device is detonated and vaporizes the threat. Everyone breathes a sigh of relief. However, chunks from one of the asteroids and debris from the explosion enter Earth's atmosphere. The debris lights up the night sky and gains the attention of the Kamacuras. Intrigued, a swarm leaves the island. G-Force's monitors pick up some activity. Unable to verify, the crew ignores the alarm. At the same time, the asteroid chunks crash into the ocean near Godzilla's resting place. The underwater explosion disturbs the area and wakes up Godzilla. Hungry and sensing nuclear energy nearby, Godzilla heads out. Somewhere out in the North Pacific, an American nuclear submarine detects an unidentified object incoming. Then all of a sudden, the submarine halts. Godzilla clenches the submarine. The monster's nails pierce the sub interior, causing water to flood the inside, tossing the crew around. The submarine explodes and Godzilla absorbs the nuclear energy and heads out. Still craving more energy, Godzilla heads out in search of another source. On his way back to Japan, Godzilla stumbles upon a Russian submarine. Godzilla attacks the submarine and inside the crew is submerged in water. The submarine explodes and Godzilla absorbs its energy. Unsurprisingly, an international crisis ensues with the Russians and Americans pointing fingers at each other. Thankfully, flyover pictures from the area reveal that Godzilla is once again at large. Heading for Kyoto, G-Force predicts that Godzilla is heading for Biollante. The military begins to mobilize and the government braces for impact. It's decided to use Mechagodzilla to fight Godzilla in the countryside before he reaches Biollante. However, that quickly changes when a swarm of Kamacuras invades Sydney looking for food. The monsters fly around the city, causing mass destruction. People flee for their lives as the mantises infest the city. G-Force is alerted to the situation and begins mobilizing forces in the region to assist the military effort. G-Force quickly realizes that the asteroid shower must have attracted the Kamacuras and woke up Godzilla. The government decides to send Mechagodzilla to Sydney and the Super X to Godzilla. Meanwhile, the Kamacuras have overrun Sydney. People flee for their lives as the monsters chase after them. The Kamacuras use their claw hands to crush and topple over buildings. A few whirl around the city, causing explosions left and right. The power of their wings cause skyscrapers to collapse. The Sydney Opera House explodes as fires break out everywhere. Tanks and fighter jets move in and attack the monsters. The Super X arrives and engages Godzilla in the ocean, yet at the same time, G-Force picks up something nearby. After scanning the area, a Mothra larva is revealed to be heading towards Godzilla, ready to fight. Meanwhile, Mechagodzilla arrives and begins raining down his Mega Buster at the Kamacuras. As the monsters battle back and forth, the Kamacuras clobber Mechagodzilla. But Mechagodzilla manages to gain the upper hand and uses his plasma grenade to slam a few Kamacuras into buildings. At the same time, Godzilla battles the Super X near the coast of Japan. Mothra moves in and sprays her silk attack, gaining Godzilla's attention. Enraged, Godzilla fires his atomic breath at the larva. The Super X fires at Godzilla, hoping to move the monster away from Japan's coast. Godzilla fires his atomic breath at the Super X, causing a malfunction. Mothra heads underwater and attacks Godzilla's tail. Godzilla wails in pain and flings Mothra away. Her body hits the Super X, causing critical damage to the vehicle. With the Super X forced to retreat, G-Force watches as Mothra battles with Godzilla. The monsters go back and forth, trading attacks. Navy ships move into the area to help Mothra, but Godzilla obliterates them with his atomic breath. The massive explosion tosses Mothra back and forces her underwater. Mothra manages to resurface, but is now separated from Godzilla by a wall of fire. Thrown off, Mothra attempts to find another route. Powerless to stop him, the government watches as Godzilla comes ashore and moves through the countryside as he seeks out Biollante. Sensing a power plant nearby, Godzilla slightly changes course. Godzilla destroys a village and walks through power lines en route. Close to the power plant, Godzilla moves in and crushes the surrounding area. After absorbing its energy, Godzilla heads out. After battling in the city for what seemed like hours, Mechagodzilla has pushed the Kamacuras towards the countryside. The monsters go back and forth. Maser tanks move in to provide backup. At the same time, G-Force's monitoring system picks up Mothra arriving in Kagoshima. The Navy moves in to stop the monster, but end up confusing her. Mothra easily crushes the ships and comes ashore. Mothra crawls through the countryside as she tries to find Godzilla. Unsure of Mothra's motives, G-Force engages Mothra. The attacks cause her to change direction. Now Mothra is on a direct path to Fukuoka. It's estimated that she will arrive in the city by the next day. That night, Godzilla makes it to Biollante. Godzilla enters Lake Biwa and roars at Biollante. Godzilla fires his atomic breath. Biollante uses its vines to block the attack. Angry, Godzilla roars and tries to get closer. Underwater, Biollante uses its vines to attack Godzilla and the battle is on. From afar, the military and the scientists in the area watch the battle in awe. Godzilla is dragged underwater by Biollante's vines. Biollante attempts to keep Godzilla underwater, but Godzilla manages to free himself. Godzilla resurfaces and fires his atomic breath, landing a hit. Biollante is injured but continues to fight. Its vines pierce Godzilla's skin in retaliation. Godzilla roars and attempts to get closer. In the air, Biollante launches its vines at Godzilla. Godzilla uses his atomic breath to destroy the vines. Biollante shoots more vines at Godzilla, overwhelming him. The vines wrap around Godzilla, crushing him. Godzilla uses his nuclear pulse to explode the vines off of him. After struggling back and forth for some time, Godzilla fires his atomic breath again. Biollante starts to burn. Godzilla fires his atomic breath more, engulfing Biollante in a sea of flames. Godzilla roars as Biollante is destroyed. Godzilla heads off and heads towards the city of Kyoto. Meanwhile, Mothra has just arrived in Fukuoka and destroys everything in sight. Tanks roll down the street to engage the larvae, but she crushes them easily. Mothra destroys city block after city block and smashes into buildings as she navigates the area. Tanks fire at Mothra, but it only causes her to do more damage to the city. Mothra crawls down the street, destroying everything in her path. Buildings collapse as Mothra rampages in the area. Eventually, Mothra makes her way out of the city and heads back into the ocean. Everyone lets out a sigh of relief, and G-Force sends a team to monitor the area should the monster reappear. At the same time, the military moves in to engage Godzilla in the countryside, hoping to divert him or slow him down. However, Godzilla easily destroys the military and continues towards Kyoto. Back in the Australian countryside, Mechagodzilla and G-Force have the swarm of Kamacuras on the ropes. The few that remain flee the area and return to the Marshall Islands. Meanwhile, Godzilla enters Kyoto and begins destroying everything in sight. Powerless to stop him, the government watches as Godzilla terrorizes the area. Godzilla uses his atomic breath to explode buildings left and right. Citizens flee for their lives as Godzilla destroys everything in his path. Godzilla unleashes his atomic breath some more, destroying row after row of buildings. Godzilla smashes skyscrapers and causes mass destruction. After rampaging for hours, Godzilla eventually heads out and goes back into the ocean. Japan releases another sigh of relief. G-Force begins repairing the Super X and Mechagodzilla. However, given the recent events, G-Force also starts the development of a new Super X. NASA detects what they believe to be an enormous asteroid heading at an incredible speed towards Earth. However, given the recent Kamacuras, Mothra, and Godzilla attacks, the US government decides to intervene. Instead, NASA is ordered to report a meteor shower and has decided to send a nuclear device to intercept the asteroid, hoping to break it up before reaching Earth. Meanwhile, G-Force has discovered a massive cocoon off the coast of Fukuoka. A perimeter is set up and they try to figure out what's inside. With 1 week left till impact, the US government watches as a nuclear device is launched into space for the mission. Just before impact, the nuclear device is vaporized. Helpless to stop what's approaching, the world unknowingly hurls towards total annihilation. As the asteroid enters the atmosphere, it explodes midair, and the monster King Ghidorah is revealed. The radar and live picture fuzz out, causing mass confusion. It's determined that the asteroid must have burned up after all. That night, an alert comes in from Paris. Lured in by the city lights, the three-headed space monster King Ghidorah descends on Paris. The monster unleashes its gravity beams and devastates the city. Gravity beams zigzag across the city, exploding buildings left and right. Citizens flee for their lives as Paris is destroyed. With Paris unrecognizable, King Ghidorah heads out. Nearing the UK, the British Air Force moves in to engage King Ghidorah. The monster fights back and dogfights with the Air Force. After going back and forth for some time, the Air Force moves King Ghidorah off course, leading him right towards London. King Ghidorah easily obliterates the last of the jets in the area. The next day, G-Force gets an alert that King Ghidorah is approaching London and it's decided to send in Mechagodzilla. King Ghidorah arrives in London and unleashes his gravity beams. Buildings are ripped apart left and right as the monster flies through the city. Citizens run for their lives as King Ghidorah rampages in the area. King Ghidorah fires his gravity beams again, destroying building after building. The Big Ben is destroyed by one of the monster's three heads. After terrorizing the area for hours, Mechagodzilla arrives in London and engages King Ghidorah. Mechagodzilla battles with King Ghidorah, but King Ghidorah proves to be a formidable opponent. Mechagodzilla fires at King Ghidorah. King Ghidorah sends Mechagodzilla flying with his gravity beams. In the heat of their fight, Mechagodzilla manages to knock King Ghidorah out of the sky with his plasma grenade. King Ghidorah regains himself and loudly roars at Mechagodzilla, causing his new AI system to go haywire. Mechagodzilla goes berserk and begins to fire all of his weapons at the city. The monsters devastate the rest of the area. King Ghidorah roars again at Mechagodzilla and then leaves the area. Now turned against humanity, Mechagodzilla follows King Ghidorah and the two head across the Atlantic Ocean for the United States. It's estimated that they will arrive on the East Coast within 8 hours. Hoping to stop or slow the monsters down, the US Air Force heads out. Combined, the monsters are unstoppable and easily destroy the jets. The monsters split up, Mechagodzilla heads to Philadelphia, and King Ghidorah heads to New York. Hours later, the monsters arrive. King Ghidorah enters New York and rains down his gravity beams. Skyscrapers explode left and right as King Ghidorah devastates the area. Mechagodzilla lands in Philadelphia and fires a barrage of missiles, destroying an entire city block. Buildings explode as King Ghidorah flies through the city, firing his gravity beam. Mechagodzilla fires his Mega Buster, followed by his plasma grenade. The military moves in to fight the monsters, but are easily destroyed. Unstoppable, the monsters regroup in Baltimore and rampage throughout the area. The next day, activity is reported from inside the cocoon. That night, during a routine patrol of the area, the cocoon starts to hatch. Stunned, the military watches as a massive moth-like creature emerges from the cocoon and flies off into the night sky. After destroying New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore, King Ghidorah and Mechagodzilla head to Washington, D.C. It's estimated that they will arrive within 2 hours and military reinforcements move in. Mechagodzilla and King Ghidorah, however, battle the forces and easily destroy them. An hour later, King Ghidorah and Mechagodzilla arrive in Washington, D.C. King Ghidorah unleashes his gravity beams. Mechagodzilla fires a barrage of missiles, followed by his Mega Buster. Buildings are ripped apart left and right as King Ghidorah flies through the city. Citizens run for their lives as Mechagodzilla and King Ghidorah rampage in the area. King Ghidorah fires his gravity beams again, destroying building after building. Monuments and federal buildings are destroyed as the monsters tear the entire city apart. Eventually, Mothra arrives in the area and challenges the monsters. G-Force watches on with intrigue as Mothra engages Mechagodzilla and King Ghidorah. The monsters go back and forth trading attacks. Mothra uses her scales attack, causing Mechagodzilla's hull to start to melt. King Ghidorah fires his gravity beams at Mothra, pushing her away. After battling back and forth for a while, Mothra is injured and unable to continue fighting. Mothra retreats after failing to stop the monsters. Realizing Mothra isn't strong enough to take on the monsters herself, G-Force starts to devise a plan. After turning Washington, D.C. into a sea of flames, Mechagodzilla and King Ghidorah head towards the west coast. Defeated, Mothra lands in a forest nearby to rest. G-Force realizes that Mothra is too weak to fight on her own. With a new plan in place, the hunt for Godzilla and Rodan begins. Since they defeated Mechagodzilla in 1984, G-Force determines they are the world's best chance. Godzilla is easily lured out of hiding with a nuclear submarine. Meanwhile, jets gain the attention of a Rodan flying near the Marshall Islands. G-Force begins to lure the monsters to the United States. During this process, Godzilla destroys the submarine and begins to veer off course. With the original Super X not ready yet, G-Force decides to send in the Super X-2, which is still under development. The Super X-2 arrives in the area and begins leading Godzilla. Since the new Super X is not yet complete, it is limited in its capacity, meaning that its main weapon, the Absolute Zero Cannon, is not yet fully functional. While the weapon is capable of firing, as of now, it only has the power to reach Absolute Zero for one shot. The crew is instructed to stick with the conventional weapons. They can only fire the Absolute Zero Cannon as a last resort. Mechagodzilla and King Ghidorah arrive in Los Angeles. Powerless to stop the monsters, the Japanese and American governments watch as the monsters rampage. G-Force troops attempt to stop the monsters but are no use. Mechagodzilla walks through the city streets, annihilating buildings left and right with its Mega Buster. Buildings explode everywhere as King Ghidorah unleashes its gravity beams. Mechagodzilla fires his plasma grenade, destroying the entire city block. King Ghidorah flies overhead, raining down his gravity beam, destroying building after building. As Mechagodzilla and King Ghidorah destroy Los Angeles, Godzilla and Rodan arrive. The world watches as Godzilla and Rodan engage Mechagodzilla and King Ghidorah. The monsters go back and forth trading attacks. Eventually, Godzilla and Rodan have King Ghidorah and Mechagodzilla on the ropes. Suddenly, the sky opens up and particles drop from the sky. Vines erupt from the street, causing mass destruction. Buildings get torn apart left and right. Biollante, in a new form, has returned to fight Godzilla. Vines strike Godzilla and pierce his skin. Godzilla wails in pain. Mechagodzilla and King Ghidorah pounce on the opportunity and gain the upper hand. Rodan is shot out of the sky by Mechagodzilla. Biollante strangles Godzilla as King Ghidorah destroys the city. Godzilla attempts to free himself, but Biollante shoots a vine through his hand. In the nick of time, Mothra arrives. Mothra uses her scales attack on Biollante. With Biollante disoriented, Godzilla manages to free himself. Godzilla, Rodan, and Mothra regain themselves. The monsters watch as Mechagodzilla and King Ghidorah destroy Los Angeles. The monsters move in and begin fighting again with King Ghidorah and Mechagodzilla. Godzilla fires his atomic breath as Mothra uses her scales attack, causing Mechagodzilla's hull to melt. King Ghidorah fires his gravity beams at Mothra, pushing her away. Rodan fires at King Ghidorah, causing him to crash in a park nearby. Godzilla moves in on King Ghidorah and gets ready to kill him. King Ghidorah trips Godzilla as he gets back up and manages to get a hold of Godzilla. King Ghidorah wraps his neck around Godzilla and begins to choke him. Mechagodzilla blasts Mothra and Rodan, keeping them back. King Ghidorah and Mechagodzilla gain the upper hand and have the monsters on the ropes. The area starts to shake, and suddenly vines erupt from the ground. Biollante regains herself and attacks King Ghidorah, causing him to lose his grip on Godzilla. Godzilla uses his nuclear pulse and pushes King Ghidorah away. Biollante's vines knock Mechagodzilla down to the ground. Now the tide has turned once again. Biollante and Godzilla battle with King Ghidorah. Mechagodzilla gets back up as Mothra and Rodan move in to fight. Rodan blasts Mechagodzilla, knocking him back. Mothra uses her scales attack. King Ghidorah dodges Godzilla's atomic breath and Biollante's vines. Biollante uses her vines and attempts to swat King Ghidorah out of the sky. King Ghidorah's gravity beams destroy some of the vines. Godzilla gets ready to fire his atomic breath, but King Ghidorah flies over him and kicks him down with his feet. King Ghidorah starts to make an attempt to escape. Godzilla quickly gets back up and fires his atomic breath at a skyscraper near King Ghidorah. The building crashes down on top of King Ghidorah, trapping him. Mechagodzilla retreats into the city as the rest of the monsters close in on a downed King Ghidorah. Godzilla moves in on King Ghidorah, but Mechagodzilla fires his cables into Godzilla and shocks him. The Super X crew decides to fire the Absolute Zero cannon at Mechagodzilla. The Super X-2 moves into position, and the crew fires the cannon. The shot hits just before Mechagodzilla can shock Godzilla again. The Absolute Zero cannon manages to freeze Mechagodzilla, shutting down his system and disabling him. Defeated, Mechagodzilla crashes into a building. Freed, Godzilla gets back up as the debris where King Ghidorah crashed starts to move. King Ghidorah emerges from the debris. Godzilla fires his atomic breath at King Ghidorah. King Ghidorah dodges the attack and heads back into space. Victorious, Godzilla, Mothra, and Rodan head back to the Marshall Islands. After Godzilla's battle with the fossilized UFO, a U.S. Special Ops team has successfully retrieved the UFO from the ocean floor. After covertly transporting the biomass to the United States, the UFO is stored underwater in a lake near Area 51, hoping to keep it dormant and away from the public. Additionally, the U.S. military has retrieved most of Moghira's parts from space. At the same time, Ghidorah cells have been discovered across the U.S. The government decides to work on a new cyborg monster capable of killing Godzilla. To achieve this, scientists will combine the Ghidorah cells and the retrieved Moghira parts, creating Mecha King Ghidorah. Meanwhile, some parts of Moghira have been discovered in Siberia. Since Japan and the United States have failed to keep the world safe, the USSR begins work on their own Moghira.